Hey guys, happy Saturday! Once again, I'm here to talk to you about an episode of a superhero animated series. Today I'm talking about the Batman the Animated Series episode, If You're So Smart, Why Aren't You Rich? And before I get into the review itself, allow me to quickly sum up what happened for those of you who don't remember, or perhaps haven't seen the episode in a long time. And if you don't like spoilers, then I suggest you get out now before you hear any. Edward Nygma is a cog in a big corporate machine who came up with a game called Riddle of the Minotaur, but Nygma is not getting the royalties that he thinks he deserves, so he is suing the company that he works for. He is promptly fired by his scumbag boss, and then sometime later, same scumbag boss is trying to bring the company to Gotham, which will create many new jobs for Gotham. But Nygma has created a new identity for himself, the Riddler, and is tormenting and kidnapping his old boss. The rest of the episode features Batman and Robin matching wits with the Riddler and trying to survive his death traps while rescuing Riddler's old boss. The first thing that might be of interest to anyone who is a fan of the TV show Smallville is that the Riddler is voiced by none other than John Glover, who played Lionel Luthor on that show. It's an interesting choice because I never would have pictured someone with such gravitas playing the Riddler. Probably because I grew up with Frank Gorshin and Jim Carrey as my Riddlers, and the Batman the Animated Series version was a distant third that just never had as much impact on me as a kid. So when I picture the Riddler, I'm always imagining someone with more of a high-pitched squeal for a voice. But Glover totally nails it here, and once you hear him as Nygma, even if you're like me and you're used to the more mousy versions of the character, you will never want to hear anyone else as the Riddler. This is also probably one of the most relevant episodes that I've seen so far, at least in terms of how we relate to society today. Sadly, it is not unheard of for someone who is considered to be a small ant compared to the giant of some corporation who gets screwed over by the corporation in this day and age. Look at comic books, for instance. Jack Kirby, Jerry Siegel, Joe Shuster, Marv Wolfman, Gary Friedrich, Bill Finger. Even if you don't necessarily agree with these men who have all waged war with their bosses over one of their characters, it is still very cathartic to see this little guy get the best of his boss, who definitely has it coming in this episode. This definitely made me think twice about my own stance on all of the different times a creator has tried to go head-to-head against a giant company. Usually, my thoughts are exactly the same as Daniel Mockridge's in this episode. You signed a contract, the contract is binding. I've said that many times when debating the rights and wrongs of some creator who may or may not have been wronged by a company that he worked for. But this episode shows that even if legally in the right for a big company to do something like this, it still doesn't feel right, and that is why it feels so awesome to see the Riddler terrorize his boss like he does in this episode. In fact, this may be the most I've ever felt sorry for a villain in this show. Yeah, I felt bad for Two-Face and Mr. Freeze, but with both of them, I was too busy being distracted by the way their supervillain origin story was being handled. I totally bought their reason for doing bad stuff in the origin episode, but then both of them came back multiple times to do more villainy, and it stops making sense at that point, which makes it hard for me to invest in anything in their plight on an emotional level. I'd say the only other villain who gives Riddler a run for his money is Clayface, at least just in the episodes that I've reviewed so far. In the past, I've complained about how, in this series, Batman himself is not much of a detective, and that he often just puts data into his computer and lets it do all the detective work. This episode, fortunately, did not have any of that. While it is still annoying when Batman does that kind of thing while he's fighting other villains, it's not absolutely crucial that Batman use his mind when he's battling, say, Mr. Freeze. Sure, he needs to keep his wits about him so that he doesn't accidentally get frozen solid while he's on the job, but his brawn is really just as important as his brain. But in any Riddler vs. Batman story, it absolutely has to be a battle of wits. Yes, this episode has Batman and Robin punching some of Riddler's henchmen, but it's very telling that that sequence is also one of the only scenes in this episode that could pretty easily be removed from the episode without changing the plot in any significant way. So that's all just a really long way of saying that I'm really glad that Batman actually got to display his intellect here. He doesn't just cross-reference Mockridge's name with the word Wasteland in his computer. He happens to know that Mockridge owns a club called the Wasteland. Sure, he doesn't know Morse code or Arabic, and so he has to use his translator on his wrist. But for every instance where he uses his translator, he also finds himself in a difficult situation where him or Robin need to use their mind, like deciding to let the hand of fate carry him out of the maze, or when Robin figures out which key to use on the door. That's all really awesome to see, and I would like to see more of that in this series from now on. In fact, speaking of Robin, I've been sort of hit or miss with him in this series before now. Some episodes, like Robin's Reckoning, absolutely have to have Robin in them, otherwise they just don't work. But then you have an episode like Christmas with the Joker, which I said way back when I reviewed that episode that it felt like Robin could have pretty easily been removed from the episode. But while this is not the first time that I felt like Robin was necessary in the show, it is the first time that I really felt like Batman and Robin had a partnership and Robin wasn't just some dude tagging along and getting in the way. And while we're speaking of Robin, I really love the interplay between him and Batman, especially when they are in the maze. Batman is often seen as a humorless, violent sociopath, and admittedly there's a lot of stuff in the source material that one could point towards to argue that that is exactly what he is. But I myself am a huge fan of when Batman occasionally displays that he can crack a smile and even a joke. Maybe that's because it's so very rare that when we actually see it, it is a breath of fresh air. I've heard that the people behind the series really loved using the Riddler, but they did not use him many more times because it was so hard to come up with riddles for him to use against Batman, and that's totally fair. The 1960s Batman series, while very fun and funny and intended to be, there were times when it sank to just plain stupid. What weighs 6 ounces, sits in a tree, and is very dangerous? A sparrow with a machine gun. That's not clever, and frankly it's not even a riddle. It's just a normal joke, and it's not one that could be solved even by the most brilliant puzzlesmith in the world. But this version of the Riddler has riddles that are challenging, but were also solvable, with the right clues and thinking of the riddle in the right way. And while I love this episode, and I do wish we could have seen more of the Riddler as he is here, I can totally understand that it wasn't easy to write stories for him, and also, if he showed up every other episode, I feel like it wouldn't be as special when he does show up. Sorta like Hamill's Joker. I love Hamill's performance as the Joker in this series, but since he shows up in about 19,048,000 episodes, it's not as much of a special occasion. Kinda like if your favorite holiday happens every other day of the year, but if your favorite holiday is the kind that only happens once a year, that's what Glover's Riddler is. Like I said, I love this episode. I don't think there's really a single thing to complain about here. It's darn near perfect. Definitely one that I will be watching many more times in the future when I have a hankering to watch something good. So did you guys like this episode as much as I did? Did you like my review of it? If so, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. And if you did like my review, then next week I will be talking about an episode of Batman Beyond. And the weekend after that, I will be talking about another episode of Batman the Animated Series. And also be sure to come back throughout the rest of the week to see other videos that I'm doing. Until then, I hope you guys have a great weekend. Catch you later.